I guess at this point, TK is kind of running the well dry on what they think is really going to sell tickets here at Mania. So we've had the return of Pat McAfee. This is the voice that Randy's been hearing in his head. This is the voice that's been kind of pushing him to this edge. And essentially, Pat essentially comes out and kind of justifies this whole thing happening by saying that, with the meta reason of the, ratings being kind of poor, of needing some sort of lifeblood or injection into the scene right now, and this was the way to do it. What? I think, Pat McAfee isn't inherently a bad presence to WWE, right? But for him to have such huge stakes in probably the most important feud or second most important feud of the whole kind of card and whole year, that has had such a build and multi kind of year story attached to it with some of the biggest second, third generation superstars in the history of the sport, to then have Pat McAfee be injected into it to kind of give it some sort of artificial boost to get these sales up in Vegas, I guess, for the show, to me is such a desperation move. I do think obviously Triple H I've been on record to say I think that this main event was kind of locked in stone, but once again, I think in the nature of pro wrestling, it's kind of pointless to talk about whether or not certain booking decisions are set like that, because I don't think that really matters, as long as how we get there and what happens to get there is fun and enjoyable, because that's what really matters, right? On paper, or at least the Randy heel turn in the way it was done, I think was really fun, and there was a lot of intrigue into whose potential collab partner could have been, or whoever was on the phone. They kind of even kept it to Randy just slowly turning back into that 2009 menace. The whole kind of Raw segment we had with Cody and Stephanie McMahon felt like, kind of a warning and a throwback to someone who was familiar essentially with Randy at that time. And, Cody also being actually someone who people kind of forget is probably the most familiar with him, was right next to him when he committed a lot of those acts or had to rein him in, etc. He was his kind of one of his comrades. There was a lot of context there that they could have grabbed from and really made a lot of drama that would have elevated fan interest if they kept, I think, going that route. I think a lot of lapsed fans would have tapped into the whole Randy heel turn if it was really motivated by him kind of going on destruction tours, doing kind of what he did to Matt Cardona, which was really, really fun and enjoyable, and gives people like Matt Cardona a spotlight in segments that are really high up on the card, and then can gauge interest for these guys since they're being exposed as well, so I thought, if he kind of went more of on towards the the end of the kind of road to Mania, maybe not having matches every week, but in these segments between Cody and Randy getting involved with each other, you have a lot of the mid-card and upper echelon card guys who have been tangling with Cody and Randy, get involved as Randy's on this revenge tour, kind of tearing them down in anger, trying to get to Cody and bring that side of himself out. I think a lot of actually almost every main event, even in the case of the great WrestleMania 40 main event, there's been so much kind of up in the air politics when it came to really what these final matches were going to be, how people were going to be involved, and what they've done to push stories forward or to essentially sell and make these events happen. And I think really with a lot of the news coming out that it was a TKO decision, essentially, to have kind of Pat McAfee come back and be here to kind of run or be Randy's voices. I think we're I know a lot of people are have been fed up kind of with the creative stagnant position that WWE has been in, I think, for 26 and 25, with the amount of wrestling that is out there and the options and the ecosystem for wrestling. They do have the AAA under their umbrella. NXT has been excellent. It is kind of mind-boggling to me how TKO doesn't understand that the peak year they had in 24 was due to the peak fan interest and the fan interaction that was happening with our say kind of in the storyline, right? It felt very direct. It felt genuinely like the fan reaction was genuinely guiding the show, and not necessarily like we were witnessing a lot of things that were trying to entice our interest, that were like ass pulls or last minute things that felt like 2025 was. And so it's like, all of this culminating with like, what we thought finally we're getting some really good stuff in this last couple of builds, where I think like they've done a really good job for the most part. I think, Becky and AJ started off super, super strong. Then I think past kind of, I think that MSG, when Becky lost the title to Maxine, ever since kind of Becky regained the title, I think they've kind of lost that fire between both Becky and AJ, but I think that can be kind of regained. They're both like super really good on the stick, so it kind of doesn't really matter. With Cody and Randy, there was a lot of intrigue there because they tried to play it off as if, maybe this could have been face, and then on heel turn, and we got a lot of slow boil and Randy starting to rage out, and there was a lot of intrigue and mystery around a potential call, and if it was anyone at all, and for it to be essentially just a cheap pop, it be McAfee is kind of stupid, especially when there's no ties. There's no like him, besides him being a commentator. There's really no reason for him to be inserting himself in this like at all. It's just plain like it just feels so ingenuine and insulting kind of to the fans too, especially when you're doing this in the main event, but I guess that's kind of the boat. I think to further kind of drill the TKO isms that are seeming to be happening, I mean, like, it seems like the nature of the beast, especially with how they book for UFC and everything, and like they try to dual book both the UFC shows and the WWE shows, it becomes more of a over like they have more of a hand in kind of who the brand ambassadors are, more than the booking or whatever we watch week to week really does. You know what I mean? So it's like, for I think the fan at this point, especially with WWE, especially if you're extremely invested, besides I think like obviously the live experience and stuff, it's really annoying sometimes when they do kind of pull these kind of stunts like this that feel insulting to kind of watch week to week then, because it feels like there was no point, but with rising ticket prices, like I said, with these last minute things, with how they've booked kind of like this whole women's division, I do think there were some upper card W's with how they booked the world heavyweight title this year, right? But like just in general, like there was just so much like lacking, I think, in general, and then to have this kind of crap cherry on top is kind of insane, especially when I think there was a lot of excitement and hype building for the program that Cody and Randy were having right now. That Stephanie and Cody segment was weird at first, but it was super awesome and like very ominous at the same time, and like completely worked, so we'll kind of see what happens with that. But it was just extremely interesting to me at this point that they're really like, that felt like people were comparing it to WCW 2000 stuff, and I kind of agree. Like this is genuinely this is just like TV show death level territory, where you're just trying to do things for a cheap pop and not necessarily serve your characters, serve your fan base, or serve like the story being told. I understand like maybe they're at the point now where like, look at the entertainment product, it doesn't really matter, there's no real prestige and thing for the belt prop, but at the same time, like, we don't see that lack of suspension of disbelief in terms of like, motivations for characters and any other type of storytelling. Pat is like, I know I'm personally not the biggest fan of Pat because he doesn't have a knowledge of pro wrestling, so he comes off as a fan who somehow like stumbled onto commentary, and like, yes, he was a goated like NFL player, a great punter, and that's cool. I don't need him like inserted in one of the biggest feuds like of the year and supposed to be the main event of one of the nights of WrestleMania, just so people like, I don't think that Pat McAfee walk-ups exist in Vegas. What was the point of that? What are we doing with Pat? We come back on commentary now and kind of play that heel commentator role and like start teasing about how him and Orton are buddy and how they're gonna like kind of, I don't know, is there a faction going on? Like I don't know. We'll see. Let me know what you guys kind of think. Man, I think at this point, TKO is AEW's biggest ally at this point, especially if they made that Pat McAfee call, because that's so bad, so bad. Let me know what you guys kind of think about it. Otherwise, SmackDown wasn't too bad, but just that was so ugh.